Welcome to this episode of Science of the Times. I'm Syma Khalid.
And I'm Tim Colson. Good to see you again, Simon. And today, are you a bird watcher?
Actually, I am. I am.
Do you have a life list?
No, I think I should. I don't particularly. So before moving to Oxford, when I was living in Winchester, I was more sort of doing it quite a lot more and really got into it during COVID, actually.
No, well, today we're going to talk to Joan Strassmann, who, I've known for her work on social evolution and particularly wasps, although as she'll tell us, she works also on other systems. And she's just written a really interesting book about the social life of birds. And we're going to talk to her about that. And it's actually out today. I recommend our readers buy it. But she's really kind of dived in to explore all the different ways that birds are social. And I mean, it's true. Sometimes when you're wandering around, you'll see some species of birds are kind of fighting with one another. Others just kind of sit around on their own.
Yeah. And
We've
it's
got a load.
difficult. I guess it's difficult to know from sort of as an amateur, just sort of observing, like you said, if you're having a coffee in a cafe and you see birds around, to sort of know, is this a species wide behavior that we're seeing, or is it just these particular three that hate each other or whatever?
No, well, I mean, they really are diverse. These, the behaviors that birds show. It really is quite remarkable. Well, anyway, let's get Joan on, and we'll let her talk about her book, which is The Social Life of Birds, and it's Professor Joan Strassmann. So let's get her on. Well, Professor Joan Strassmann, thank you very much for coming and joining us on another Science of the Times podcast. Perhaps you could introduce us and tell us a little bit about what you do, and then we'll dive into your excellent new book, which we'll put details on below. But it's The Social Life of Birds, and it's actually published the day this podcast comes out, and it's well worth a read. It's fantastic, and it's an imprint. It comes out as an imprint in Penguin Random House, I believe. So, Joan, perhaps introduce yourself and say a little bit about what you do.
So I'm Joan Strassmann, and I just love social behavior of all kinds. My own research has mostly been on social wasps and then social microbes. But you might guess that those just don't grab the standard student as much as some other organisms. So for many, many years, my teaching has actually been on birds. And so this book really comes not out of my research, but out of my love of teaching. And so that's a bit different from most people, but it worked for me.
And are microbes really social? What do you mean by sociality with the microbes before we get onto the birds? I mean, they're not going down the pub partying or anything like that. I mean, they're just hanging out together, growing together.
One might say that there's nothing more social than a microbe. Microbes don't do anything by themselves. They're constantly talking to each other. They're releasing compounds. They know how many others of their same kind are in the area. They know whether there's enough of them to kill enemies or whether they better just scooch away. So actually, microbes are the best. The thing is, it's all chemical communication and genetic communication. So it's not something we can watch. But what's super exciting to me is the theories that we've learned from watching animals like birds really apply to microbes and gave us insights to microbes that we never would have had we not studied birds.
Simon, go on. You better ask a microbe and chemical question, given you're the biochemist who works on them.
Well, I guess it's not really a question, but yeah, I mean, as you said, microbes don't do anything alone. But for example, bacteria, we know are probably the most aggressive organisms known. Right. And so the corollary of that then, of course, is that they have to compete, but also cooperate. And so you get these ideas of sort of communities and social behaviors. And I think, yeah, you're right. I mean, I fully agree with you. Microbes are the best. What I didn't know is how much we know about them from learning from, watching birds. That's completely new to me. Is
Well,
there
so
anything specific that you can point to, sort of one example?
I would say all of the theories of social evolution, from Bill Hamilton's landmark kin selection work on down, have come from watching birds and mammals, to be fair. And of course insects. So just one small example, we think of social insects who have sterile castes, workers that give their entire lives for the colony. Well, there are microbes who will explode themselves and die and kill others to benefit their own genotype in the area. And understanding that completely comes from from our understanding of Hamilton's kin selection theory.
No, fantastic. And let's talk about your book, and we'll talk a little bit more about what kin selection is. So, it really is a fantastic book. I mean, you've kind of hit that sweet spot of making it captivating. There's some, the bits that made me chuckle, but it's also incredibly scholarly, and you're exploring the social life of birds, from all aspects of it, right? From, flocking together, roosting together, breeding together, raising chicks together. You take examples from across the globe. I was thinking this just sounded like a great excuse to go to all sorts of exotic locations as well. But congratulations on it. It really is fantastic. And we really enjoyed it. And you did it from teaching, but have you always been a keen bird watcher? Is that kind of what got you into it? Or have you kind of become a keen bird watcher and a keen observer of birds after having sort of started teaching some of the examples?
So my first book was called Slow Birding, and that kind of describes the sort of birder that I have more or less always been. I love to watch them. I love to look at them. I didn't really have a life list until eBird kind of forced it on me. But I always looked at birds from childhood. My father was a German Jewish immigrant right before the war, and brought his old German binoculars. And Germans have a great tradition of loving the natural world and going hiking and just knowing what's out there. And so I really got it from him. And I did look at birds from a very young age, but not in a very thorough way.
Right.
And sort of, so the book is, as you said, built up from sort of you looking into other people's work and bringing it together. How easy or difficult was it to access all of the information and data you needed?
So, since I am in the field, I was even kind of ironically president of the Animal Behavior Society at a time I worked neither on behavior nor animals. Um, I'm very much of an insider. And so many of the people were friends. And actually, I did no traveling for this book. It was all travel for various scientific reasons that took me to places where then I just did a little bit on the side. So people were extremely kind and generous with their most personal stories, which I then used freely.
So, and I think so. What might be nice to do is to kind of go through a few of examples in the book
Yeah.
of some of the ways that birds behave socially, because I think one of the things that your readers and our listeners will be intrigued about is actually the wide variety of ways in which birds behave. And, I think perhaps, sort of I found really compelling was one of the studies you talked about, which are these common redshanks, and and the geometry of safety, as it would be. So I mean, would you like to kind of explain a little bit about what they do? Because it's quite impressive about how that they behave to try and minimize the risk of predation from sparrowhawks and things.
So this is based on Will Cresswell's work and the work of his team over many years. And redshanks have a problem, and that is they're not a small bird, but they eat very small prey, much smaller for their size than most other birds. So, like I might wish I could do, they just have to eat all the time to get their tiny food. And the best place for that food is actually closer to the shore, closer to the forest side of the shore, which is the very place that the sparrowhawks lurk. And so they just have this challenge between where the best food is not a very safe place to be. So they do spend a lot of time farther out on the mud flats where the food isn't as abundant. And when they're close to the forests and to these dangerous sparrowhawks, they use safety in numbers. They use the geometry of the selfish herd, as Hamilton's wonderful paper was called, to try to reduce the chance that any one of them would be the one that was eaten.
And it works. I mean, it's a successful strategy. And I think one of the themes that runs through your book is all of these behaviors are about maximizing survival and reproduction. So it's all about, staying alive to breed.
Yes, yes, it's very important. Sort of the first half of the book is about individuals that are in it for themselves, and they themselves must survive to find a mate and breed. And then the second half of the book is about animals that themselves might not survive, but they help their relatives or their offspring survive. So it's sort of two different halves to the story.
So, Joan, is it I apologize in advance if this is a ridiculous question, but within the same type of bird, sort of community, are there these two types? Would there be both types? The selfish kind of bird that only wants themselves to survive, and then those that look after the entire flock? Or is it very much this type of bird, everybody looks after the flock, and this type of bird, they're all selfish? Or do you see what I mean?
So maybe it's more the kind of behavior. So nearly all birds have parental care. So the parents are altruistically, you might say, taking care of their young, although I do like to talk about conflicts within families. I have three kids, so it kind of comes naturally. But it's more so birds that flock might also do other kinds of behaviors. So it's more like that, not so much as a dimorphism in behavior or poly. Yeah, it's not that some are being selfish and some are not. It's more focused on the kinds of behavior than necessarily the kinds of birds.
Okay.
So the redshanks come together to feed. Things like black vultures, which is another example from your book. They come together
Right.
to share information, right? They're information brokers almost when they're coming back to their roosts. So I thought that was a kind of a fascinating study as well. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about that.
So the black, I just loved reading about the vultures because they do have what might be called information centers, which is an idea that Ahmad Zahavi and Peter Ward had early on that was really annihilated by Doug Mock and subsequent work that really showed birds aren't generally going to go somewhere and altruistically tell non-relatives where the food is. But if the food is abundant, lasts only a short time, and because vultures spend a lot of time with their young and don't turn over that often, then it really makes sense. So if there's a rotting pig carcass that you can only eat at for 3 days, there's no harm in sharing the information. And one that shares one day might benefit from the information of another the next. So it's it's an unusual example of that kind of sharing. And I have to say, Patty Parker herself, who's a colleague of mine in St. Louis, though at a different university, was also a very colorful person to talk to.
And how do they? I will. I'll come back to that and find a little bit more. But how do they share the information? Is it because one of them comes back smelling of dead pig, or has kind of got blood all over its head and feathers, or are they talking to one another?
I would say probably neither. I think they just go there, and if you know that you don't really know where the food is and you see someone else taking off in a purposeful direction, you just follow them.
So tell us about this colourful colleague.
Patty Parker's just a fantastic colleague. She's after her PhD on these vultures, she's more recently spent an awful lot of time looking at birds like Galapagos hawks. But I mean, for her PhD, she lived in this shack that had no bathroom, no running water. She heated water in a metal tub to bathe in, and had the right accent, the nice North Carolina accent. So these country folk trusted her and let her into their parents and grandparents' homes because they had largely been abandoned as the paved roads went in a couple hundred meters over from where the old roads were. So there was this whole human geography of newer houses with old abandoned ones behind, which were where the vultures nested. So, yeah, it was just really fun to think of Patty studying this bird that most people despise. She had to put tags not on their feet, but on their shoulders because the birds cool themselves by defecating on their legs. And so that would cause their legs to get infected if they had bands on them. Yeah, it's just a cool story.
It definitely is, Joan. And if there's any PhD students listening, you don't know how good you've got it, guys. This is how it was done. I was just thinking about this, just sort of going through the book and this idea of these partnerships that males develop. So to sort of try and impress choosy females that you talk about. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that.
So you're talking about the lance-tailed mannequins,
Yeah.
and there's an alpha and a beta, and they do these dances on low parallel twigs, and they'll just do them incessantly, trying to get a female to come and mate with the alpha. This is a lek species, so in lek species, there's no care by the male. The females just get a mating. And so exactly what they're going for has been puzzling. And this is a story I just love. The researcher is Emily Duval, who was actually an undergrad at Rice University, worked in my lab, not with me, but with a colleague who was working there on grackles. Emily was in our Rice University orientation group, which meant she came to our house for dinner when she was 18. And now she's 50 and she's just president of the Animal Behavior Society. And she's been doing this work for many, many years. So she's figured out all kinds of things about these leks.
Do we know what the beta male gets out of this? Does the beta male then go on themselves to become an alpha male at some point?
Yes, they can. The challenge is wondering whether or not there are other things other males are doing instead of being beta males that might also lead to success. So one experiment Emily did was temporarily removing the alpha males and seeing if the betas took over and became alphas themselves. But the beta males, sometimes they'd go find another alpha to be beta to. Sometimes they took over, but were then chased away by something else.
Right.
So it seems that there are survival and other advantages to being beta, but like so much in biology, the more you really study the story, the more complicated it gets. And in this book, I did try hard not to simplify things to make it look like we'd figured everything out and despair new grad students from ever imagining they might find an unanswered question.
And so, I mean, on that line, maybe it would be a useful kind of time to have a little bit of a discussion about kin selection. So, can you explain to our listeners what kin selection is? Because that's kind of one of the things that helps drive the evolution of social behavior.
Yes. So kin selection is an idea that once you hear about it, it seems kind of obvious. It was championed and made very clear by Richard Dawkins in his famous book, The Selfish Gene. Kin selection simply means that you can pass on genes by ways other than rearing your own young. You can help your parents rear additional young. You can help your siblings rear young. You can help other individuals rear young. And this is what explains the workers in social insects that are sterile. They're females helping their mother rear more young. So the basic idea is if you have if you have any kind of gene, and the way evolution works is genes that succeed become more common in the next generation. The standard way that happens is by rearing your own young to whom you're 50% related. So a gene that you have has a 50% chance of being in any given young and will be carried on. But a gene in other kinds of relatives can also be passed on. So you have 50% of your mom's genes. If you help rear a sibling, you have 50%. If it's a full sibling sharing mother and father, you have on average 50% there too. So that's the relatedness side of kin selection. Equally important is the costs and benefits. And originally, it was easier to look at them than at relatedness, but now with genetic techniques, relatedness is easy. And we have to wonder about why you would ever be able to rear more siblings than you might be able to rear progeny of your own. And the nice thing about having to worry about that is you really have to do field work and you really have to get outside and look at the animals in nature. And if possible, you can compare those rearing their own young to those helping a relative, which is something I spent many years doing with primitively eusocial wasps, and see what the advantages are to passing on genes by helping what we call non-descendant kin, relatives that aren't just your own babies.
I was still processing what you were saying there about the kin selection because it's difficult to make the parallels with humans in a way there, right? I mean, you can to an extent, but then it becomes, and I don't know if that's, I was just trying to think, is it because when it can't be because we're more evolved, it's just evolved in a different way, I guess, right?
So actually, if you look at humans, there's just a huge role for, maiden aunts and bachelor uncles. And I hesitate to give any examples because I'm not a human biologist, but there are societies where certain family sizes might have more unmarried individuals that really do devote themselves to rearing their nieces and nephews. And, I think if you look at our fiction, it's just full of really close, warm, and loving relationships between children and their aunts or uncles, people they can turn to when their parents are difficult. So, and I actually think humans have very strong extended family networks and do lots of helping outside of just the parent offspring. I kind of think the parent offspring thing is kind of a 1950s America myth that we would all be very happy to get rid of.
No, I think that's right. And, being able to drop off young kids with a sister, with an aunt or, grandparents is important. But going back to birds, one of one of the bits that I really enjoyed about your book was a type of cuckoo, a tropical cuckoo, the greater Annie. I didn't know about this. Do you want to explain some of their, I mean, talk about like a sort of crazy set of behaviors, but perhaps you could talk us through those because that was fascinating.
Yeah, so the anis, they are the neotropical cuckoos, and they do not lay eggs in another nest like the common cuckoo of Great Britain or Europe. What they do instead is they have communal breeding, and this is really not so common because it's that they'll pair up, a good monogamous pair, but then they'll all lay eggs in the same nest. And so this was something that Sandy Verenkamp first worked on with the groove-billed anis, and then Christy Reel worked on with the greater anis, and Jim Quinn worked on with the smooth-billed anis. So the groove-billed anis kind of started it, and the way they worked was they'd have a nest, and there'd be a group of them, usually, not always, but often, two pairs, three pairs, something like that. And they would all lay eggs, but they didn't really like each other, so to speak. So if you had not yet started laying eggs and you saw an egg in the nest, you would tump it out. And so the sooner you started laying eggs, the worse off you were. Now, birds can only lay one egg a day, and anis maybe even every 2 or 3 days. And so it's just this sort of game of who's going to lay first, because the last laid eggs also don't really get cared for. So the birds lay many more eggs than are ever going to be reared. Now, the greater anis that Christy Reel studied only reproduce successfully in these groups. And there is sometimes sort of hanky-panky among the various partners, as one might imagine. And so Sandy Verenkamp's work in Costa Rica on the groove-billed anis, she had a tame ani that she used to lure the birds into a cage and band them and then let them go. Christy worked in Barra, Colorado Island, and netted or caught at the nest her birds. And the crazy thing about her work is these nests were overhanging the water in Gatun Lake around Barra, Colorado Island. It's an artificial lake created by the formation of the Panama Canal. So there she is in a small boat, often on a ladder, trying desperately to catch these birds or to census them, with mirrors on stick and stuff, while there's crocodiles and alligators, caimans and alligators in the water. I should rephrase that. There's for sure caimans. I'm not sure about the others in the water, waiting to either eat an unfortunate bird or could nip a researcher or an undergraduate that slips into the water. So it's really, really quite a fabulous study.
That's amazing. Sort of, you think about the lengths you go to for your research. I mean, most of us don't consider we might get eaten by some, lake-dwelling creature.
Exactly.
So one of the wonderful things about your book is you kind of, weave these stories that you've been talking about, of the research and the findings that come up from it. Was there anything that really jumped out at you? Do you have a favorite? I mean, maybe we've touched on it already, I don't know, but do you have sort of a favorite bit of research or a favorite behavior, kind of social behavior that you just thought, God, isn't evolution just astonishing sometimes?
Generally, my favorite is the one I just read about
I thought it
because
might be.
there's so many great stories. I think one that might be of interest to your listeners, is the Taiwan Yuhina. And so this is another communal breeding bird that usually has two or at most three pairs breeding in the same nest. And it's a small bird. It's one that I saw myself in Taiwan. They're not rare. And what I thought was really cool about them is so they fight like crazy to keep each other from laying eggs in the nest. Even though they do all care for the young together and everything, they try to keep the others from laying eggs. So that's fine. That's conflict. That's no surprise. What really surprised me about them was that in cold, rainy weather, they were less able or less desirous of fighting each other. These are small birds, they get cold easily. So when the weather was really terrible, they would fight each other less. And you'd think in bad weather they'd have less reproductive success. But in fact, because that cold weather meant they could fight less, they actually did better and they produced more young. So it just makes you think, honestly, if you guys would just all get along, it would be better for everybody. But that's just not how biology
The
works.
trade-offs between competition and cooperation, eh?
Yeah.
So we're kind of running out of time. Do you have a final question before I mention the book again, Simon?
Yeah, I guess I was just curious. So you sort of said that, this book arose out of your teaching primarily. But do you think going forward it's sort of perhaps changed? Does it sort of has it made you want to do your own research into this area? It's sort of looking at sort of birds and their social behaviors.
So I do have one paper from many years ago. It was a grad student's work on mockingbirds, and she never published it. And we have finally worked up the data, and we will publish that. I would say that more than anything, I feel like we scientists have figured out so much. And I just like my new niche of being the interpreter of science rather than the generator of new actual research. And I hope maybe in the book there are some new insights, but I really feel that going forward I will be doing more and more with trying to share the knowledge of science with the world as a whole.
So Joan Strassmann, the book is The Social Life of Birds, Flocks, Communes and Families. It's beautifully illustrated by Anthony Bartley. It has different publishers in the US and the UK, and you can find the details below. We'll put them down there. It's a really wonderful read. It's informative, it's delightful, it's got some, fantastic biological and research stories in it. It's well worth reading. And, I just wish I was one of your students, Joan. You got to this through teaching, but it really is fantastic. So very many congratulations. And I'd encourage all of our listeners to go and buy a copy. Thank you, Joan, for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been so much fun. Thank you so much for talking with me.
The pleasure's all ours. Well, what do you think of that, Simon? Now, when you're
Oh,
wandering around looking at those three birds that you see outside a cafe, you'll be able to interpret a little bit more what they're up to.
absolutely. That was mind-boggling. Just the diversity of behaviors.
No, I mean it's birds. They're a very successful group of animals and incredibly diverse. I think most people would know they're diverse when you go in terms of size, when you go from things like hummingbirds to ostriches, in coloration, where you get, incredibly brightly colored things like Gouldian finches to your little brown jobs like your warblers. People
Yes.
probably know that, but what they probably didn't realize is quite how diverse some of their social behavior is, whether it's flocking, whether it's roosting together at night when they're sharing information, like the vultures she talked about, or whether it's about these nuts cuckoos that, like, want
Yes.
to lay their eggs in the middle of everyone else laying their eggs in a communal nest, the Annies. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
no, absolutely. And I think, and also sort of we'll encourage people to read the book because we could certainly not touch on every aspect of the social behavior of birds that Joan talks about in the book. We sort of talked about a few examples, but there's all sorts of other the things about birds sort of warning each other, for example, giving out alarm calls and all sorts.
No, exactly. And she does do a really lovely job in the book of explaining, of tying these examples together really nicely through the theme of kin selection, which she talked about, and how that's led to all of these interesting social behaviors. Is you have sort of push and pull of working together, but also conflict because you know evolution. She said everyone wants to maximize the number of genes
Yes.
they leave in the next generation, and they can do that either by breeding themselves or by like working with their relatives.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we also mentioned, while we were talking to Joan and she mentioned herself, the book is beautifully illustrated.
He's called Anthony Bartley, and I think he's based in the US somewhere.
Yeah, he's based in Chicago and he's got this great website, which is fadingroyalty.com, in which he sort of has a bunch of his artwork, but also talks about some of the motivations behind them. And a lot of it's sort of motivated by issues in mental health. So it's well worth taking a look at that too.
And of course, one thing that we didn't have time to talk about, but Joan mentioned to us, is she kind of looked deliberately for an illustrator for the book to draw these illustrations for someone who's kind of up and coming and who perhaps hasn't done this sort of work before. But I think it works really well, and I'd encourage our readers to buy Joan's book. I really enjoyed it. I'm a biologist. I know a reasonable amount of natural history, but I learned a lot reading it, whether it's these kind of crazy leks where the males compete with one another to get the mating, or it's the redshanks foraging, out where sparrowhawks are trying to get them. Yeah, hard life as a bird sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just a case of, flying around and having fun, right?
No, it really isn't. Anyway, great to see you, Simon, and
Yeah,
we'll
you too.
see you soon.
Take care.
Yeah,
Bye.
bye.